Welcome to the PCNSE prep session. In this session, we will take a look at some initial information that you'll need in order to pass the exam. We will cover a few different study tips, some suggestions for getting you to your goal. We will also take a look at a few sample questions to give you an idea of what to expect on the exam, and then we will give you a few parting words of wisdom. With regards to the initial information, the exam itself is 80 minutes long. In that 80 minutes, you are asked to complete a total of 75 questions. The exam itself will cover topics involving the Palo Alto Networks firewalls, as well as some related technologies. The focus of this exam will be on the firewalls themselves. More on this in just a few moments, but the emphasis here is to focus on the firewall. And when it comes to other related technologies, identify how those technologies integrate with the firewall. You will not necessarily be tested on the installation or architectural design procedures for these other related technologies. In order to help you with preparing for this exam, there is a study guide available. In order to find this study guide, I strongly recommend that you open a browser of your choosing and just perform a web search. So open up whatever search engine you prefer for the internet and search specifically for Palo Alto Networks PCNSE 8 Study Guide. In addition to the study guide, there is information available in the Learning Management System. To reach the LMS, you can navigate to education.paloaltonetworks.com/learning center. When you attempt to log into the site, you can find the information you are looking for by logging in as either a customer or as a guest. Once you are logged into the site, you will have access to free courses, including EDU 110, which is an essentials course, EDU 120, which is managing multiple firewalls. It's Panorama related. And then we do have also options for signing up for instructor-led courses, which include the 210 version of the essentials, which is just instructor-led with labs, the 220 version of the managing multiple firewalls course, which again, instructor-led, you have labs, and then we have EDU 330, which is a troubleshooting course. Gives you a little bit of a hands-on experience, which includes access to the CLI and explanations about how the CLI functions and how the firewall, how the operating system actually functions when it's attempting to process traffic. In addition to all of these courses, we do have practice exams, assessments, which are kind of quizzes, and the ACE exam, all of which can help you in preparing for the PCNSE exam itself. If you prefer hands-on, we do have practice labs available. These can be found at the AWS Marketplace. If you want more information regarding the practice lab, feel free to do a quick web search for Palo Alto Networks Education Practice Lab. With regards to the exam and what topics to actually focus on, I would strongly recommend that you focus on the firewall. And what I mean by this is that there are other related technologies and products and various features out there, all of which can potentially tie into the firewall. So what you need to focus on, as an example, would be how Panorama can actually manage the firewall. What does Panorama allow you to modify, alter, and do on the firewall itself? So the installation procedure for Panorama, for purposes of this exam, I don't really care. With regards to HA for Panorama, that's not directly related to the firewalls. Therefore, for this exam, I don't really care. But when it comes to things like templates and device groups, or the ability for Panorama to download and store updates from which the firewall can obtain its own updates, now that is of interest because it pertains directly to the firewall. In addition to focusing on the firewall itself, Make sure you have a clear understanding of the security platform story. And what we mean by this is do not be trapped into thinking of the word platform as being hardware. In the context of Palo Alto Networks devices, the security platform is how the various features and offerings from Palo Alto Networks fit together to create a very sophisticated and enhanced security platform. So as an example, the firewall has the ability to obtain updated information from a threat intelligence cloud, which includes Wildfire and PanDB, which is the URL filtering option. These items, URL filtering, for example, Wildfire, these can be fed via Traps, which is an endpoint protection solution from Palo Alto Networks. So, even though this exam is not necessarily on Traps, even though we are not asking you necessarily to follow the line from Traps through Wildfire and all the way over to the firewall, you do need to be aware of where Wildfire and URL filtering could get its information from and how that impacts the firewall itself. So know the platform story, have at least a general concept around how the various pieces fit together and how they support each other. Also, be sure you are clear on what the default behaviors are for the firewall, for its features, and for its policies. So as an example, the security policy. What is the implicit default action of the security policy? Assuming traffic does not match any of the existing rules, or maybe you don't have rules configured. What action will the firewall take on traffic traversing its data plane? And the answer is, it depends. The firewall will actually perform a zone check to verify where is the traffic coming from, where is it going to, and if the traffic is intra-zone, by default, the firewall will actually permit this traffic. If, however, the traffic is traversing two different zones, then we will implicitly deny the traffic. This is very different compared to other firewalls on the market. So be aware of these default behaviors. Also, other default behaviors to focus on include decryption. So what does decryption do if the attempt to break open the traffic fails? Quality of service is another one. What is the default classification of traffic if that traffic is not defined on the device itself? In other words, we have an application coming through the firewall, it's web browsing, but I have no quality of service policy actually defining what I should do with this traffic. And the answer is, it becomes class 4. What is class 4? I have no idea. It depends on the egress interface and what QoS profile is assigned to that interface. So these are the types of default behaviors you need to be aware of, because this exam, it does not test you on memorization. This particular exam, the PCNSE exam, is more focused on your understanding of how the features function within the next-gen firewalls. Also, just as a helpful tip, I strongly recommend that you log into the CLI of the firewall sometime and take a look at the policies. What I mean by this is run commands like show running NAT policy, show running security policy. Instead of looking at the configuration, instead of doing a show of the config in configuration mode, go into operational mode, issue the command show running NAT policy. It's very interesting how some of the rules show up, especially when we look at certain types of features like bidirectional. So take a moment, look at the NAT policy, especially if you have certain features enabled, such as oversubscription or bidirectional options, these types of things, and see if you notice any oddities. These types of nuances can help you in passing the PCNSE exam. All right, so for specific topics of interest, Definitely be aware of the various features available on the Palo Alto Network's next-gen firewalls. So this includes everything from quality of service through high availability to app ID over to zone protection, DOS protections. You need to have at least a basic understanding of what these are, how to enable them, and again, what are the default behaviors of these various policies and features. The good news is you are not going to be asked where to find a specific little checkbox in the configuration itself. You might get questions, though, that ask you to take a look at something like a NAT policy or a security policy and then identify what the expected behavior is based on the policy that's displayed. And this, again, tests your understanding of how things interact and how features actually function. Additional topics that you should focus on include things such as architecture. So in the firewall itself, you have all these various components, these different chips, memory banks, buses, switching fabric, all kinds of stuff. When it comes to these various components, they are loosely broken down into one of two planes, the management plane and the data plane. So be aware of, well, what do these planes do, generally speaking? What are they responsible for? And then we have the term single pass architecture, or SPA. Definitely look that up. And again, have a basic understanding of what SPA means. The exam's not going to ask you which of the following definitions is clearly linked to single pass architecture. Now, that's not the purpose of the exam. Again, the purpose of the exam is to kind of test your real world knowledge of how things actually work. But understanding, or at least knowing what single pass architecture is and what it does, that could help you with understanding how things are identified in the firewall, how the firewall engages content and app ID, and understanding those particular topics will aid you with some of the questions in the exam. Processes and procedures. Don't have to go over how to make a phone call to support necessarily, but it would be very good to understand or remember how to install licenses, or to be a little more precise, have a clear understanding of what licenses are required to enable certain features. So while you may not get a question revolving around what are the various time lengths you can have a license for, so 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 2 year, whatever, I would be aware of, if you have a threat prevention license, what features are enabled with that threat prevention license. Wildfire. Does Wildfire actually need a license? Or doesn't it? Does it have a subscription or not? If it doesn't, what can you do to traffic? If there is a subscription, is it required? And what does it add or give you? With regards to Panorama, again, the focus here is on what can Panorama do to configure the firewall, update the firewalls? What are the different actions you can take on the firewall using Panorama? Just keep that in mind. Focus on the firewall. Some of the challenging topics that have been noted over the last year to 2 years include these sections or these topics. So we have administrative roles. These admin roles would include things like, what is a super user? Is the root user account actually available and accessible? What is the difference between a role-based set of permissions versus dynamic-based permissions? So definitely look up those types of key terms, role-based, dynamic-based, etc. And when it comes to authentication, quite a few people struggle with what are the different types of authentication supported on the firewalls, not just for authenticating admins, but also for things like Global Protect and Captive Portal. Also, sometimes people struggle with, what is this MFA thing? That's multi-factor authentication. How do you turn it on? How does the firewall know you want to use this? What exactly is it, and what can you do with it? From there, we start getting into other authentication types potentially, such as two-factor authentication. Know how to implement two-factor authentication and have a good understanding of what are the pros and cons with regards to implementing it on a Palo Alto Networks firewall, especially if two-factor authentication is being implemented with something like Global Protect. Other areas that test takers struggle with include wildfire concepts. So, what is wildfire? What tells the firewall to actually forward traffic to wildfire? Does wildfire actually stop zero-day attacks, or is it more for just identification of those 0 days, which then would in turn allow us to maybe reduce the response time of a firewall in its reactions to additional threats? So know what wildfire does and does not do. What are the file extensions that are supported by wildfire? What are the operating systems that wildfire actually uses for purposes of identifying potential threats? And then know the sequence. A firewall receives a file of interest. How does it know if it's okay to pass that file to wildfire? How does the firewall know that the file submitted turned out to be benign or malware or grayware or a phishing attempt? So those are the types of things that you'll need to focus on and be aware of. With regards to autofocus, yes, autofocus could end up being a component of one or two of the questions that you're asked on the exam. However, again, this is not a sales exam. It's not a marketing exam. Autofocus ties directly into specific logs, and you should be aware of what logs autofocus can help us with. So how does autofocus tie directly into the functions of the firewall itself? Focus is on the firewall. Now that hopefully you have an idea of the topics that are recommended for studying to prepare for this exam, here are a couple of sample questions. What plane moves traffic through the firewall from one network interface to another? The answer is the data plane, C. The way to break down this question, to look at this, first off, notice there's emphasis on network interface to another. So it didn't say management interface. It's talking about traffic that's traversing or passing through the firewall. So if you know how the device works or functions, then hopefully you'd have a clear understanding that, oh yeah, the management plane can't actually pass traffic through the firewall. You can have servers and other devices speak to the firewall through the management plane, or to the management plane, I should say. So you can ping it, you can log into the firewall, but you can't actually send a packet from one server to another through the firewall using the management interface. It does not have the ability to actually forward traffic. So that understanding, you now think, oh, okay, we're talking about a network interface, which is when I'm connecting my Ethernet or if my fiber connectors to, I'm trying to get packets from point A to point B. Well, so let's see, which plane are those interfaces actually connected to? Is it the management plane? No, that's for management functions. That's the management interface itself. Control plane. Control plane is often used in a synonymous manner with management plane. So even if I wasn't familiar with the term, control, management, very similar, not what we're talking about. Forwarding plane. Forwarding sounds pretty good, but that's not it. It's the wrong terminology. For the Palo Alto Networks firewalls, we refer to the data plane as the muscles of the firewall, the plane that's responsible for forwarding or moving traffic from point A to point B. Next question. Which role type is like a root admin account? The answer, of course, is B, super user. Super users pretty much have the ability to create virtual systems, other admin accounts. They can do almost everything on the device except access the shell. So super user is the closest thing to a root admin account, since it can do pretty much everything. A device user, yeah, device admins or device users, they can do a lot of stuff, but they cannot take transaction logs. They cannot create virtual systems. They cannot create other admin accounts. So device user is not correct. Incredible user. Okay, you're all incredible to me, but incredible users, that's not a valid role type. It doesn't exist. Enable, that's a mode for another vendor's product. so that's not it. Process elimination, super user. All right. Next question. What does a security profile do? All right, so the answer is actually C, as in Charlie. Single pass parallel processing is another way of saying single pass architecture, or SPA. So while that sounds great, and it's all fancy and stuff, single pass parallel processing is where the firewall essentially performs app ID and content ID simultaneously. Now, technically speaking, app ID is activated a split second before content ID, but we do not wait for app ID to finish before starting content ID. They're running in parallel. So this is why we refer to this as single pass parallel processing. So that's the identification piece. Does a security profile actually turn this on? No. Pretty much PAN-OS is built around the concept of app ID. And if app ID and content ID are occurring essentially at the same time, no, profiles don't actually turn that on. It's kind of basic built-in function of the firewall. User and ID scanning. Well, that's not it. What a security profile really does is tell the firewall what to do about threats. So the profile tells the firewall what actions to take. This auto-closing of ports, that's kind of like the inverse of an ALG, an application layer gateway, which has to do with SIP, as well as other protocols and other software types. But again, security profiles have nothing to do with D. The best answer here is actually C as in Charlie. Next question, which of the following allows an admin to modify a firewall's network settings using Panorama? So in other words, which of the following answers allows Panorama to modify network settings in a firewall? Of course, the answer is A, as in alpha, the templates. If you've used Panorama, then you would hopefully remember that anything found under the Network tab and Device tab can be controlled or modified using templates. Policies and objects, those particular settings can be modified using device groups. Syslog scraping, yeah, that's not actually what we're talking about, so that's not even close. And then the tech support bundle is more of a reporting thing, telling us what's going on with the firewalls or even Panorama itself, as opposed to changing anything, modifying the configuration of the device. So templates, that is the correct answer. Which of the following policies enable the use of MFA, multi-factor authentication? Okay, the answer for this one, A, is an alpha. It's the authentication policy. If you've used or tried to enable multi-factor authentication, would hopefully remember this. You'd remember which policy you had to go into. See, security policy could be affected in a way by MFA because you have to have rules to allow certain types of traffic, etc. However, that's not what actually enables the use of MFA. One of the tough parts about this particular question is the use of an acronym. So unfortunately, you might have to be a little familiar with some of the abbreviations or acronyms used by Palo Alto Networks when it comes to their product. So authentication policy is the correct answer. Next, what will the security rules do to decrypted web traffic from the inside to outside zones? So here we are looking at this screenshot of a security policy. As we go through the information provided here, we only have a few columns. We have no additional information. And my possible answers are that the traffic is either allowed, denied, unknown, or reset. Okay, the answer for this one is B as in Bravo. The traffic would actually be denied. All right, so this one, if you don't have a clear understanding of how security rules work and also decryption, this is somewhat of a tough question. So first off, SSL traffic. We know that we're talking about some type of encrypted traffic. It's SSL or HTTPS because, well, it says decrypted web traffic. That means originally the traffic was HTTPS on port 443. We do have a rule allowing SSL on application default. And if you know how the Palo Alto Networks firewalls are set up, if you know how the applications work, then you know that the common port and protocol for SSL is TCP 443. The problem is, in this question, it's asking us, what if that traffic is being decrypted? All right, so that rule there, the second rule, that will allow the initial handshake, but after decryption, what does the firewall see? Oh, it sees that it's web browsing. Okay, well, our first rule here says application is web browsing, service application default allow. Oh, so that's the answer, right? Oh, we have another problem. Now we're being tested on our understanding of how does decryption work and what does the firewall see after decryption? And of course, the answer is, well, when traffic is decrypted, we see the clear text payload, the unencrypted payload. So we now have updated layer 7 information. So after we decrypt this connection, what do we see? Oh, we see it's web browsing inside that SSL connection. The problem is, what about the port? Is the traffic actually still on port 443? Or does the firewall say, oh, it switched over to 80 after I decrypt it? From a networking perspective, decryption doesn't change the port. Therefore, even though the layer 7 information tells us it's web browsing, it's still on port 443. If we look at the service column in that first rule, it says service application default. And what's the default port and protocol for web browsing? TCP 80, not 443. So our firewall, how does it match traffic against security rules? From top to bottom. So is the first rule a match? No, it is not. Is the second rule a match? After the first couple of packets, no, it's not. Is the traffic going from a zone to the same zone? Nope. So the third rule is not a match. That brings us to our last rule. If the traffic's coming from any zone, going to any zone, application any, support protocol any, deny. Yeah, now that traffic's being shut down. Therefore, the answer is B as in Bravo, denied. In this question, this is an example of some of the questions you may see on the exam, where you're given a snippet of a policy and you're tested on your understanding of not just how the policy is evaluated, but what are the different settings being depicted? What are the defaults or the pieces of information underlying some of the objects you're looking at? Next question. Which of the following takes precedence for determining a packet's route? The answer is D, policy-based forwarding. So the way this works is that equal cost multipath, yeah, that's nice. It does assist with identifying a route, the best path to take, that type of thing, as do metrics and administrative distances. But all of these are related to your virtual router, the VR, that's being used to process the traffic. Policy-based forwarding, on the other hand, yeah, that's a policy. And as a collective whole, PBF, or policy-based forwarding, takes precedence over anything found in a virtual router. Static routes, dynamic routes, any type of routes. Doesn't matter what's in the virtual router. Policy-based forwarding comes first. Wow, how would you know that? Well, there is a document out there that would help you. This is known as the Palo Alto Networks Day in the Life of a Packet. A lot of the questions that we've already gone through and we've answered, the answers for those questions can be found in that document. So I strongly recommend that you take a look at that document, at least have a basic understanding of the flow of the steps and sequences mentioned in that document. Next question. If an administrator wants to move traffic from the server to the loopback interface, okay, so what has to be configured to get this traffic to work? So looking at this, we have traffic coming from some server or desktop or something at 192.168.5.15. Looks like it's connected to the trust interface, which has a 5.1 address in the same network, and its own virtual router A. 1/3 is in the DMZ, a different VR, different network. 1/2 is in the same virtual router with a public IP, different zone. And we have a loopback interface, different zone, different network, different virtual router. Holy smokes. So how do we get the traffic to the loopback interface is the question. If the traffic's coming from one zone to a different zone, I need a security rule. All right, so check, I do need that. If the traffic's going from one virtual router to another virtual router, I need a static route to make that happen. I need a static route actually in both virtual routers pointing in opposite directions. Otherwise, they're on separate routing tables and they can't see each other. They have no way to get to each other. Okay, so that's the second thing I need. And this, well, these answers, there's 3 things in each one. So what's the third thing I need? Oh, wait. How do you tell an interface to actually respond to a ping or to management logins or any of that stuff? Oh, I have to actually enable a management profile. And if we look at all these different answers, B is the answer. Static route, security rule, management profile, all 3 elements. Okay, and again, this is an example. You might get questions with a little diagram like this, and it's not meant to trip you up or trick you. It's just, again, it's testing your knowledge of how things interact. So what is the purpose of an application override rule? Well, the name kind of says it all, doesn't it? It's there to change the name of the application. So let's see, is the application the port? Is the application the protocol? No. So the answer is C. It's literally there to change the name of that's identified using layer 7 information in a packet. Okay, so hopefully you found these questions and answers to be of some use. So hopefully you'll be able to have an idea now of the types of questions, answers, diagrams, exhibits, all that good stuff that you might see on the exam. So a few words of wisdom. As a company as a whole, we are here to try and make you successful. So to this end, be aware that there are a lot of materials out there for studying, as well as a YouTube channel. So if you go up on YouTube, you can do a search for Palo Alto Networks PCNSE, and you'll find a few different exams, some of which are directly from our education department. Definitely take a look at the information. It is refreshed periodically, and there are more and more different recordings actually going into that channel. In addition, we have the study guide. Remember, to find this, do a web search for Palo Alto Networks PCNSE 8 study guide, and that will get you the most current one, the one that's for this year's exam. In addition, there is a PCNSE practice exam or practice test that you can take through the Learning Management System, LMS. And the site for that, again, is education.paloaltonetworks.com/learning center. Also through the LMS, you're welcome to sign up for the self-paced free classes, which are EDU 110 and 120. 110 is for the firewall, 120 is Panorama. And you can use the majority of that information for helping you to prep for the exam. Now, just going through those courses will not be sufficient for getting you to pass the exam, but it will get you most of the way. So you'll be pretty close once you're done with those courses, and then you can go through the study guide and see what else you need to study up on. All right, well, thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you found this information to be of use. Good luck with the exam.